Hey guys, welcome to Walking with Disciples. So today we're gonna try to tackle a whole chapter of Luke because there's a lot in there. I'm gonna kind of burn through some of the stuff. Again, there's a lot more. We could spend weeks just on Luke chapter 20, but I want to talk about the gist of what we learned from 20. So if we start Luke chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "One day Jesus, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders came up and said to him, 'Tell us by what authority you do these things. Or who is it that gave you this authority?'" So, those of you who've been joining for a while, so we're talking about Solomon's portico again, right? This is where he's at. He's teaching. This is not abnormal for a rabbi to go there and teach. So he's beginning to teach, and he's talking about the gospel, which is, it's funny. I mean, think about it. Jesus is talking about the gospel, right? He's talking about himself. How amazing is that? I'd love to be there. So we find these priests, right? Scribes, the people we've been talking about like in Acts, right? These same individuals coming to him and saying, they're challenging him. They're beginning to question him. And if you listen to the service on Sunday, you're part of the service. You heard me talking about the donkey and this idea that it was without blemish, and the lamb back in the Exodus was without blemish, and that Jesus taught in 4 days from the 10th day of Nisan to the 14th day, just like the lamb back in Exodus. So if you missed that, you got to go back to that. But so here's one of the days where he's teaching, and they're looking for some way to accuse him of something. They're asking him, and Jesus is very wise and understands what is going on. What is it they're trying to do, right? So he says, this is how he answers them. "I also will ask you a question. Now tell me, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man?" And so the baptism he's talking about, John, is John the Baptist, okay? The kind of the forerunner of Jesus, right? The one that actually Jesus got baptized by. And he basically said to them, okay, I'm going to answer your question if you're going to answer my question. And here's the reason Jesus did that. He understood their motives. He understood what they were trying to do. They were trying to trick him. They were trying to bait him into saying something that they could begin to cry out blasphemy, that they could condemn him to death. But Jesus was smarter than that. And I think the application for this piece as we look at it, right, is to understand when we're talking to people, what's the true intention? What is their intention when they're asking our questions? Are they trying to rabbit trail us in a different direction? Are they trying to get us frustrated? What's going on? That you and I need to have wisdom in who we allow to bait us, because so often you hear about people that get in arguments and things just go horribly wrong, and they start out with the right intention, like I want to share God with you, I want to share the gospel with you, and the other person who's not receptive is trying to bait you and try to talk about things and get you upset and get you to the point where you invalidate your testimony because you come out in anger, you come out in frustration. And Jesus was like, I'm not going to allow you to bait me in this, right? And so they answer him and they said, well, we can't tell you. That was their answer, right? They couldn't, because they were afraid of the people, because if they said it wasn't of God, the people would be upset. If they said it was from God, they'll say, why'd you kill him, right? And then he goes on in verse 9, Jesus goes on and he's teaching. So when you read chapter 20, think about it as Jesus is there teaching, and this is just his teaching, the whole thing. Don't, the scriptures like to break it down, or the people that broke it into different segments, but it's one long teaching, okay? Think about it that way. You're kind of all sitting around. And he says, and he began to tell the people, right? So he answered their question and said, well, I'm not going to tell you. You can't tell me that. I'm not going to tell you. And then he goes, okay, let me tell you this though. And he began to tell the people a parable. Now, parables, if you don't know what a parable is, it's a short story with a moral. In fact, I like to tell like the youth and the kids, it's a short, right? If you've seen like a Disney short, it's a short story. Most of the time it's false, right? It's a fictional story, that tells a moral statement, one or more moral statements. And Jesus loved to use these for several reasons. But as he uses, he says, a man planted a vineyard and let it out to tenants and went into another country for a long time, right? He said, then he sent a servant to the tenants to get the rent, basically get his portion of that. The tenants, the people renting the field, beat him, right? And sent him away. And so the owner of the field sends another servant, and they do the same thing. And then the owner's like, okay, you know what? Finally, hey, I'm gonna send my son, because surely they're not gonna do the same thing to my son. But when the tenants saw him, when they saw the son, it says this in it's verse 14. This is the heir. Let us kill him, so the inheritance may be ours. They're like, if we kill this this man didn't have any other heirs, we're going to go ahead and get the field ourselves. And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. When the owner, and Jesus poses another question. He says, what then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come, and he answers the question. He'll come and he's going to destroy the tenants and give the vineyards to others. And it's interesting because the people responded and said, no, he wouldn't do that. It doesn't make any sense, right? But then he goes on and says this, but what then is this that is written, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And now, so tie that back into what Jesus is just talking about. They're asking what authority, and then he goes right into this. And what he's talking about, let me just lay out the parable very simply to you. The vineyard is God, right? It's heaven, if you want the eternal life. And the servants that the tenant was sending, they were the prophets of old. And God kept sending the prophets, and they would kill the prophets. And he's like, okay, I'm going to send my son. Surely they're not going to do the same thing. And Jesus is foretelling and saying, you all are going to kill me. I'm the Son of God. You're going to kill me. But God's going to come and he's going to destroy you, right? And he's going to set up a new foundation, new cornerstone, something that bridges the gap, right? The cornerstone in a building, or some versions talking about a capstone. Same kind of overall concept. If you want to think about it, it's the foundational part. It's the ending part of the building, right? And then we kind of go on, and we see then the scribes and the chief priests. They're like, okay, we don't like this because we understood. They understood it. They're like, wait, we're the tenants, and you're telling us we've been killing the prophets, and we're going to kill you, and you're the Son of God. So they're like, we're really going to get him now. So it says they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be sincere, that they might catch him in something. They're trying to fool the Son of God. I mean, how crazy is that? And so they asked this question, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God, right? They're buttering Jesus up, right? Trying to get him. He says, is it lawful for us to pay tribute to Caesar or not? And I love what the verse says, but he perceived their craftiness and said to them, show me a denarius, show me a coin, right? He said, whose image is on it? And they said, well, Caesar. And he says, well, pay unto Caesar, or render unto Caesar what is Caesar, or render unto God what is God's. Okay. Again, he's looking at the foundation, looking at the understanding of what it truly means and what was happening in that time frame, right? And then finally, we see that the Sadducees come up. So it's another sect. We've had the scribes. We've had the Pharisees, right? We've had some people. Now we've got the Sadducees, another sect that denies Christ, right? Or I'm sorry, denies resurrection. And it says this, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man dies, having a wife, man's brother dies, having a wife but no children, the man must take the widow. And they basically say, so this man dies, he has a wife but has no children, and so the brother must take over. The brother takes over the responsibility. He dies before he does it, and that happens. And they said, so in the end, whose wife is it, right? Whose wife? When they go to heaven, whose wife? And Jesus answers them and says, the son The sons of this age marry and are given into marriage, but those who are considered worthy to obtain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry or given into marriage. Okay, so let me just, there's a lot here, and I don't want to get too distracted in marriage and how does that whole function work, right? But what he ends and says, now he is not God of the dead, but God of the living, for all live to him. Then some of the scribes answered, Teacher, you have spoken well, for they no longer dared to ask him any questions. So the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. They just didn't, and they were trying to find a way again to cause him to do something of blasphemy. And Jesus was understanding what was going on. So he began to expound upon that concept and help them out. And he says, God is not the God of the dead. God is God the living. He talks about, that God, we talk about God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We talk about that he's the God of the living and not the dead. And so, as he answers these questions, as he answers these moments, what he's doing is he's trying to help them understand everybody around there, right? In the Solomon's portico, he's trying to help them to get to the point where they truly understand what's going to happen in the next couple of days, right? To point back to when they start seeing some of the other things like we've read in Acts, and talks about that many believed, right? And that we'll read, I think in Acts chapter 6, that a lot of the priests, several of the priests start to believe as well. Why? Because they remember Jesus teaching this stuff and how he answered and the manner in which he answered them, and he wasn't fooled by them. And so yesterday I promised to talk about the fig tree. And so it's almost 12 minutes. So I'm going to talk about the fig tree, but I want to tie that in because it's very interesting, right? So Jesus is walking, he sees a fig tree, right? And the fig tree is full bloom. Okay, it's early spring. Normally you wouldn't have a lot of leaves on it, but it is. It's an early bloomer, right? So it has a ton of leaves, but as an early bloomer, it should have some early figs, but it doesn't. It's fruitless. It has no fruit, right? It looks good, but it has no fruit. And so he condemns the fig tree and says, you are going to wither and you will never produce fruit. That ties into what's going on here. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, the scribes, the people there, they look good on the outside. He even talks about beware of the scribes, and in chapter 20, that they've got these long robes and they love greetings and they love fancy prayers and being honors. But they look good, but there's no fruit. And so he really warns us and says, you must have fruit. And in the chapter 20 is such a beautiful example of what fruit looks like. It's going about and being what God has called you to be, as he would say, render or give unto Caesar what is Caesar, give unto God what is God's. Well, your life is God's, and you are to produce fruit. And it's a very clear warning to his disciples and to each and every one of us. If we just look good and we don't have any fruit, we need to be cautious, because we're the same as these Pharisees. We're the same as the Sadducees. We're the same of the scribes. We're the same as those individuals that were trying to bait him. And all I know is I want to be a fig tree that produces fruit. I don't want him to curse me. I don't want him to say, die and wither. I want him to say, well done, good and faithful servant.